How's that in the back? Perfect. And how is it on Zoom? Oh, and the lights. Perfect. Let us begin with the words of the poet Robert Frost and his poem, The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. The words of the poet Robert Frost have me recalling frequent trips to the woods, traveling paths where there is less activity and maybe for some less appeal. I'm also struck at the dichotomy of the need to choose one or the other. From this way of thinking, we can split into the ways in which we see the world, in groups and out groups, places we would go and others we would avoid. It was in the 1960s, well, let's take that date back, 1600s, that Descartes advocated for mind-body dualism, that the mind and body are separate and distinct entities. But the truth is we cannot nurture only one to truly be sustained. Science teaches us that very thing. It requires that we travel both paths. When we travel the path with which we are familiar, there is the opportunity to click over onto autopilot. And that's not all bad. As we move through the well-worn and comfortable route, we can turn our attention to other things. From that place of comfort, our nervous systems can get a well-deserved break. The road less traveled is one that is journeyed with intention and attention. These are opportunities to connect with new destinations and new learnings. And it takes a lot of work. It takes work to veer off the established paths and explore something new, even if for a short while. Hidden away, we connect with the sacred found in the ordinary and the real. We do this work not only in the physical world, we do it in our emotional and spiritual lives as well. Leading the workshop series, Owning Your Religious Past, groups of Unitarian Universalists have gathered to examine how they've come to this place. What are they leaving behind which no longer serves them? And what are they choosing to carry forward, which continues to be life-giving? I think about this in my own journey, where I found Unitarian Universalism, this beautiful little path, leading in a new direction from the tradition of my childhood. And I think about it in the context of our modern world. It is in flux with war and violence and hatred near and far. And so it is critical that we do the work of self-reflection about our actions. Are we acting out of habits that may be causing harm to others, not challenging what has become the social norm? Or are we working towards justice, equity, and compassion in our human relations. And I want to share a story with you to illustrate this very point. And it started with the work of just a few people engaged enough in the work of self-reflection to bring love and compassion to a time of hate and violence. It was December of 1993 in Billings, Montana, when the Schnitzer family was celebrating Hanukkah, the Jewish festival, usually in December. This festival celebrates the miracle of having enough oil in the lamp to last one night, and instead it lasted 8, or so the story goes. And so during this time, it is common for the Jewish people to light the Hanukkah. Has anybody heard that word before? No. So fun fact, menorah is likely the term that you've heard, a Hebrew word for the 7-branched candelabrum used in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. The Hanukkah is simply a menorah for Hanukkah. The Schnitzers, in their festive mood, decorated their home with decals on the windows and the Hanukkah as well. Unbeknownst to them, on a fateful night, a stranger came onto their lawn and threw a cinder block through one of the windows, the window of 5-year-old Isaac's bedroom. Thankfully, at the time, Isaac was in another room watching TV with his sister Rachel and a babysitter. It was known that there were hate crimes in the area, and although there was nervousness about putting up the decorations, the family decided to do so anyway. They wanted to celebrate. And in that same moment, they also felt regret and fear and helplessness. Most of their neighbors at the time were white Christian families. Only 7% of people identified with a marginalized group, including some Latin Americans, Black people, and Indigenous people. White supremacy had been on the rise in Montana since the 1980s, and the messages continued to get closer to home. In one publication by the KKK, there was a flyer that named Mr. Schnitzer, sorry, my friend, who had recently been elected to the Montana Association of Jewish Communities. They had taken this to the officers in the synagogue to see what they could do, and no one chose to speak out. Later, Mrs. Schnitzer later learned that people were afraid. They were afraid to put themselves and their community at risk. Now, in this same neighborhood lived Margaret McDonald, a part-time director of the Montana Association of Churches, who started a petition, one that opposed hatred and bigotry. But she felt as if she had hit a wall and she just couldn't break through. And so we wait an entire year to Hanukkah of 1994. The Schnitzer home was attacked again. The police advised that they should take down their decorations. The local paper picked up the story and interviewed the family, who noticed the irony of the timing. Hanukkah is a time where people recognize the struggle thousands of years ago for the Jewish people to worship God in their own way. And that was all they wanted to do with their family then and there. Mrs. McDonald read this quote in the paper, and she tried to imagine what this could be like in her own life. What if she was the one who had to explain to her children that it wasn't safe to put up a Christmas tree or decorate their door with a wreath? She picked up the phone and called her pastor. She asked the reverend if they could draw Hanukkahs at Sunday school and invite people to put them in their windows. The pastor agreed and even enlisted the help of other local churches. Everyone knew that by putting these Hanukkah pictures in their window, they were putting their lives and their families' lives at risk. They began to understand how someone else was feeling every single day. The local newspaper even got on board and they printed one that you could cut out and put in your window. Many people had their windows smashed in. Others, it was their cars. And there were notes of hate, and despite all of that, new decorations showed up every day. There were too many to destroy them all. At first, I was surprised by my own response to the synagogue, wondering why they avoided helping their own people. Of course, after a pause and a deep breath, letting myself imagine what it might be to be in that room, my wondering transforms to compassion. This is a community who has been facing anti-Semitism for years. They're the ones on the margins. And who am I to expect that they are also the ones who have to do the work to face systemic injustice? What they needed was a community response, particularly from those who held power and privilege, and in this case, the white Christian families in the community. And that is exactly what happened. As we engage in this work of self-reflection as well as social justice, we are blessed when we have many perspectives, which can help us take a wider lens than the narrow view of our own lonely path. Dr. Sharon Welch, a Unitarian Universalist ethicist and theologian, developed an ethic of risk, one born out of the feminist movement. She observed that those who engage in justice work, who struggle from a place of incomplete understanding, hold a limited perspective. It is common in justice work to face partial victories, as well as continued defeats. So the question has to be asked, how do we keep going? So she advocates for an ethic of risk comprised of 3 elements: a redefinition of responsible action, grounding in community, and strategic risk-taking. Responsible action is not the project management approach to solving problems, maybe one we're ultimately familiar with. This is more along the lines of a choose-your-own-adventure novel. At each point, you are faced with a decision. You make an informed one from the options available to you in that moment. And you keep moving forward with new possibilities that open up, some of which you've never even imagined. Staying grounded in community. Just as we turn to one another for support in spiritual growth, we also need one another in shaping our morality, for we only have part of the picture. Alone, our understanding of the world is incomplete. This goes for individuals and our tradition at large. We can't operate in this world only staying in our own bubble. And so this community support and helps sustain the work over the long term. I know I am in need of community, and perhaps you are too. The concept of justice doesn't feel like something we could and should aspire towards. The meaning we hold dear seems invisible right now. We'll find the resilience to come back together from another defeat and another. We will continue putting our efforts to bring forth a vision in which all people can live into the highest version of themselves. It is in this community that we will support each other until we are ready to take the next responsible action. Lastly comes strategic risk-taking. In the book, Sweet Dreams in America, Making Ethics and Spirituality Work, She describes the moral strength found in, and I quote, the courage and humor of a community that continues to learn, to love, to acknowledge our capacity for harm, and from that acknowledgement, to find together the balm for the journey, presence and witness to the struggles and joys of life, end quote. We will never truly know someone else's lived experience. We do our best to create an idea in our messy imagination to help us inform our response. And yet, we never truly know. Our social locations, the unique intersections which create our individual identities, the place from which we experience life, invites us into sacred unknowing. This is how we practice our faith. The faith that we hold, whether in the divine or in humanity, or both. Our justice work is one where we have to be okay with making mistakes, taking paths less traveled to explore the destinations ahead. Here, we can also be sustained by knowing that as we travel these paths, there are others traveling others. And so we journey simultaneously. We journey together. These winding paths are, to poorly paraphrase Theodore Parker, the moral arc of the universe and the ways in which we support it bending towards justice. When we respond to injustice, we send a powerful message. We affirm the sacredness of life. We respond with compassion, which literally means to suffer with. This is what happened in Billings, Montana, and this is what happens here when we side with love. For those of us who move through this world with power and privilege in parts of our identities, the question we are facing now is, what are we willing to give up? Can we turn off the autopilot from time to time so that we can engage with life as it is right in front of us? Now, of course, we also have the challenge of facing injustice in public settings. The assumption is often that someone else will take action. Someone else will call for help. They will administer first aid. That person will accompany the bereaved. It is human nature to assume in a crowd of people, in a world filled with individuals, someone else is better suited to help. More often than not, that leads to everyone keeping their heads down, avoiding trouble. And because we make these assumptions, no one shows up to provide help. This is known as the bystander effect, and it is a powerful reminder of the extra effort it takes for us to respond. Dr. Elias Ortega Aponte, president of Meadville Lombard, one of our Unitarian Universalist seminaries in the United States, writes of an ethic of response. He says that our responses to injustice reveal our commitments and values, as well as the kind of world in which we are willing to live. Our response moves the center from ourselves to the world beyond us with a sense of accountability. We have the opportunity to be agents of change, workers for justice. We, to paraphrase the Greek proverb, are planting seeds for a tree in whose shade we will never enjoy. And so to do this work, we need to be compassionate towards ourselves and each other, for our commitment is one for the long haul. Friends, let us take the long, less traveled path where we turn our living into loving. Let us take the path which calls us into community within our tradition and with all of creation. As we take these many paths, even when we don't meet one another, we hold faith that we are sharing the journey in good company. Blessed be, and amen.